Go ahead and click on the.
Oh,
There we
Got
go.
it.
let me push my, I got it here. Got it. Can we start now? Good, okay. It's 3:01
Yes.
on April 21, 2022. This is the regular meeting of the Woodland-Davis Clean Water Agency. After this particular regular meeting, we are going to go into a special meeting, which will include a closed session. Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
I can. Chair Rich Landsberg,
Present.
Vice Chair Josh Chapman,
Here.
Director Tom Stallard, I didn't hear you. Where did Tom go?
We lost Tom.
He dropped off. Okay, I'll get him back. In the meantime, Director Will Arnold,
I'm here.
and
Michelle, you went on mute.
Michelle, you're on mute.
did not mean to do that. UC Davis Representative Camille Kirk.
Present.
Tom's back.
Tom's back, and Director Will Arnold. Got him.
I'm here.
And absent Director Angel Barajas.
So we have a quorum. We can continue with our meeting. Any public comment on item number 1, which is a teleconferencing?
None received.
Great. I'm going to move to approval of the agenda number 2. Any public comment on the approval of the agenda?
None received.
Can I get a motion on the agenda then?
So moved, Arnold.
Arnold moves, second.
Second, Stallard.
Stallard, second. Madam Clerk?
Chair Rich Landsberg,
Aye.
Vice Chair Josh Chapman,
Aye.
Director Tom Stallard,
Aye.
Director Will Arnold.
Aye.
Hey, Rich, you're moving too fast for me. The board needs to take action on item 1 to authorize this video conference meeting.
Yes.
All right.
Stallard moves.
That we video conference.
There's a motion regarding item number 1, which is the teleconference process. Stallard moved. Arnold second.
Correct.
Clerk, Madam Clerk?
Chair Rich Landsberg,
Aye.
Vice Chair Josh Chapman,
Aye.
Director Tom Stallard,
Aye.
Director Will Arnold.
Aye.
Thank you.
We caught up now? I think so. Takes us to number 3. Do we have any public comments on anything that's not on the agenda?
No public comments received.
Voicemails, emails?
No voicemails,
Smoke
no
signals.
emails, no smoke signals. Nobody showed up. No.
Excellent. Okay. Takes us to item number 4. There are 4 items on the consent calendar. Any public comment on the consent calendar, Madam Clerk?
None received.
Any comments or wish to pull an item from the board?
Motion to approve the consent calendar, Mr. Chair.
Stallard moves, the consent calendar. Second,
Second, Chapman.
Chapman seconds. Madam Clerk?
Director Will Arnold,
Aye.
Director Tom Stallard,
Aye.
Vice Chair Josh Chapman,
Aye.
Chair Rich Landsberg.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we're going to go to item number 5, which is the general manager update, as well as an operations update. So I think we're going to hear first from Tim or from,
Yes, yeah. First from Tim and then from Stan.
all right. All yours, Tim.
Good afternoon. I'm Tim Bush, General Manager of Woodland-Davis Clean Water Agency. We have 4 topics really on agenda for today on the GM update as a water supply outlook, kind of where things are more from a higher level, statewide level, and then down to us. And then where we are looking at supplemental water supply options, capital improvements that we have on the table for this year, and then our usual operations update. Next slide. So in terms of the overall statewide water outlook, you've seen this graph before at previous meetings. This is the 8 station index, which is kind of a aggregation of 8 stations in Northern California to kind of look at what's the overall water supply look like. The state tracks this every year. This graph is updated every day. So I pulled this information from this morning, so it's as of yesterday. Percent of average for today's date is 79%. And the way to understand the graph, the top of the shaded area is the average for the past 30 years. And then each line is a year, and they're all labeled on the right. The darker blue line kind of in the middle is this year, it's labeled current. So as of yesterday, we're at 79% of average, which in and of itself wouldn't really be too bad if it weren't for the fact that the last 2 years were much, much drier, which you can see right below. 2019-20, 2 years ago, was only about 60% of average. And then last year was, I don't know, less than half of average and the third driest ever. So the kind of combination of us being in the third dry year in a row really makes the situation much worse than 79% of average would really make one believe. So that's kind of where we are today. It was very flat from January 1 until about a week and a half ago, and we've gotten some rain recently, so it's actually gone up a little bit in the past week or two. Next slide, please. So I wanted to look real quickly at the two larger reservoirs that kind of impact our water rights substantially. This is Lake Oroville. Similar graph, this is data as of yesterday. This is the water storage graph for Oroville. And it's the same thing. Basically, the average is the top of the shaded line. Oroville typically reaches its peak storage right around June 1 of every year. And then the blue and green line above are wet years. And then the red line in the middle, I guess, is the drought of 76, 77. The darker blue line is this year, beginning October 1. As you can see, kind of going from left to right, right around in December, the December storms really helped improve storage in Lake Oroville. But since that happened, it's been more or less flat. Heading into March, it was actually going down a bit already, which got us concerned, and everybody really, that term 91 could start early because Oroville was already losing water in March. But then the rains in April have helped, and also snow melting have increased storage a little bit in Oroville. As of today, Oroville is about 51% full, still well below average, but it's about half full right now. Next slide, please. Lake Shasta is a bit of a different story. This is the largest reservoir in California, and it did not receive much water supply from the December storms. As you can see, it went up just a little bit from the storms we had in December, and then basically from January 1 through now, it's been flat. Slightly, very slight increases in storage, but not much. Shasta typically reaches its peak storage right around May 1 each year. So there's only a few days left to really increase storage, and it's not likely to happen. Shasta, as of today, is about 38-39% of storage, and significantly below average for this year, which really impacts water supply to us and a lot of other agencies this year. Any questions on that so far before we move on? Okay, next slide, please. So now I'll walk into a little bit more detail on how this impacts the agency and our water supplies this year. Term 91 is not yet in effect. At our last meeting, I think we were talking that Term 91 we thought could start early April. Then rain showed up in the forecast, got pushed back to mid-April. Now the prediction is right around May 1. And this is kind of the statewide group, including Reclamation, DWR, State Water Board, large water users. Everybody kind of gets together and works on this. MBK does a lot of the math for the state and for everyone. And that was kind of the moving prediction this year, really led by a couple of factors. The recent precipitation we're having in April, but also a big factor is that a lot of the farmers in Northern California are simply not planting this year. So there is typically by now, there's much higher agricultural water use as rice is starting to get flooded and other crops are planted. That's not happening this year. So there's less water use and also somewhat more supply, which is delaying the sort of Term 91 till early part of May, which actually helps us substantially over our earlier planning. We had met in our earlier discussions, we had mentioned that Reclamation had notified the agency that our CVP water right will be substantially curtailed this year. Just as a reminder, we have 10,000 acre feet in our CVP water right. Our contract does include a Shasta critical year condition, which when that's declared, reclamation can cut our water supply by 25%, which happened last year. This year, due to the lack of storage in Shasta, reclamation had notified us in March that they were going to have to cut much deeper than that. We were notified last week officially that we will have access to only 18% of our CVP water supply this year. So it's an 82% reduction in our water supply. It's basically consistent with what we were expecting this year, but it's by far the most severe cutback that has ever happened since the existence of Shasta Reservoir. So to that end, as you know, the agency secured a water transfer from the Saltwater Water District, for 6,000 acre feet. We are nearly completed permitting with DWR and the State Water Resources Control Board, working through the temporary urgency change petition. That's the permit needed to make the transfer happen. We were working towards an April 15 date. Now that term 91 start is delayed a bit, we're now working towards a May 1 start date because the saltwater water has a defined end date. So the later we can start, the more water we get during the shorter number of days. So it's in our advantage actually to start a bit later. And the state understands that as well. So we're working together with them. There was a couple of contract terms that were in the permit that we're objecting to some extent. One of them is the stream flow depletion factor. The state is wanting a higher stream flow depletion factor, which is basically an assumption of water that is lost from when it leaves the dam to reaching our intake. It was assumed to be at 13% based on scientific data not too long ago. The state is wanting to impose a 25% factor this year, partly referencing the governor's executive order on drought. Partly there's some new data that shows maybe it should be a higher number. I don't know. If you wanted me to go into it more, I can. The net result of it is that there's somewhat less available water from the Saltwater Water District because of this higher factor. But the good news is with the later sort of term 91, it kind of ends up being about the same water supply to the agency ultimately, in terms of how much daily water flow we get. And some good news actually is with term 91 not starting till May 1, Woodland continues to inject into its aquifer storage and recovery wells. And Woodland will have stored about 700 million gallons by May 1. The good news for the agency is that allows more flexibility between all three partners in the agency to kind of share water with each other, that Woodland's able to store a bit more water this year. Another thing that we're looking into this year is to verify that our pumps in the joint intake facility in the Sacramento River will continue to function given the projected river levels this year. The reason for that is because Shasta Reservoir will be operated at a far lower flow rate than it ever has in its history, which of course means a lower water level in the river, which can impact pumps and operations in the river itself. I'm not particularly worried about this. Last year, the river was very low. We were actually seeing tidal impacts at our intake north of I-5, where we noticed that because the low level alarm would go off once a day. And it turns out that was low tide at the intake. So if we're already in tidal impacts, I don't know how much lower the river actually will go at the intake, but we're investigating that because we'd much rather know if we're going to have a problem now than wait until the middle of summer and find out that we don't have adequate submergers for the pumps. But I don't expect it to be a problem. Next slide, please. I guess any questions so far? Okay, how this impacts the agency this summer this is kind of a high level operational plan that we still need to do some refinements, and we will over the next few weeks. So our high level plan is that we would utilize the water transfer from Saltwater Water District exclusively from May through August. It results in a finished water delivery to the partners of 14 MGD total, with roughly 7 to Woodland and 7 to Davis and UC Davis. That represents a little bit less than half what the partners use. Their partners would use right around 32 million gallons per day throughout the summer months. The agency would typically operate at around 27 MGD if we did not have restrictions on our water rights. So it's a little over half what the agency would provide and a little under half what the partners actually use. We would reserve our CVP water right, or 1,800 acre feet, to use only in September and October. The reason for that is it's just simply not enough to spread out throughout the summer months. Using that water only in September and October provides 5 million gallons per day to Woodland and 4.6 to Davis and UC Davis. And those rates are set. That's per our contract, where Woodland has 52.1% and Davis, UC Davis have 47.9% of the CVP water right. That again represents roughly a third of what the partners use and roughly a third of what the agency would typically deliver without restrictions. We are working on an agreement with Conway Preservation Group, which is on the agenda later for today, for potentially an additional 1,300 acre feet, which would be split between Woodland and Davis. This would add roughly 2.6 million gallons per day to each Woodland and Davis, and then allow Davis to use some of that water also in July and August to bump up deliveries to Davis during that time. UC Davis is at this time evaluating their participation level. The policy the agency has, I don't think it's written, it's just a policy we have, but that whenever we are using purchased water, any of the partners can participate to whatever level they want. A partner can elect to participate or not. It's free and open. So UC Davis is considering what they would like to do, and it's a balance between budget, water quality, operational constraints that exist. And what our plan is that we're working with UC Davis now, and we'll work on that over the next few weeks. Agency is planning to deliver roughly half what the partners need. The partners will have to use the backup supply significantly this year, but we all have flexibility to share with each other. So in working with UC Davis, whatever level is decided at, Woodland and Davis will share equally in that responsibility. So we're all working happily together, and it will work out. So that will rebalance how much we're actually delivering to each partner once we know that. And if term 91 gets delayed further into May, we'll try to push the start back, which also will readjust the water deliveries to everybody also. The other thing we probably will do, although I haven't really talked with Stan much about it yet, is we may take some water away from October and use that earlier in the year. The CVP water rate, both ours and Conway's, can be used anytime during the summer. So we do have the ability to reschedule some of the water during more of the peak summer months versus October. October can be high water use. It really depends on how October ends up being. If it's hot and warm, or if it's more cooler and some rain, we can get a big swing versus very high water use to not so high. So we may take some away from October later on. Any questions on that? I knew I threw out kind of a lot.
Good.
Okay, next question, or next slide, sorry.
There we go.
So we are working on supplemental water supply options. We have about 8 or so options that we're considering for more of a longer term option. They've taken a little bit of a backseat to trying to find something for this year, given how severe this year is for us. But we do have about 8 options we're working on, anywhere from a long-term contract with somebody, maybe an option in contract where you have an option to buy water. But then also at least 2 of them are outright water right purchases that we could possibly do. We're really looking in 2 areas. We know that we have a severe risk in November and December of not having any water right available when term 91 goes past October 31. But also some needs in summer months. Last year, we had a 25% curtailment of our water right and a longer duration term 91. And that ended up cutting water supplies to the partners rather severely, where they had to use their backup supplies more than what was really intended for that long of a time period. So we're looking for both additional supplies in at least some years during the summer, and then of course, November and December. Still looking at Sites Reservoir, we did make the short list to be considered to become a Sites partner. We have at least a few more months to make a decision point. So what we're working towards doing is bringing multiple options to the board to consider, both short and long-term options to compare and contrast with sites and have a robust discussion and a good decision on what to do moving forward. Any questions on that? Okay, capital improvements, we have a few projects we're working to get constructed this year. None of these are new. I think you've seen all of these before. At the joint intake itself, we need to do a few things, including improving roof access at the joint intake. And then the screen cleaner wire, that's the wire system that the pulleys are misaligned. We need to realign the pulleys and then replace the wire so that it doesn't fray and then break. And then we also need to install a platform at the to reach the cleaner, basically to clean the bearings to help the thing run longer before we need to replace it. This is a cost share item with RD 2035 where our split is agency pays 20%, RD 2035 pays 80% of that work. And then the other thing we're working on to complete this year is the erosion control project. We have erosion on the south side of the intake. It did not get worse this year because the river did not come up enough to cause any erosion this year. But that's something we didn't get done last year, partly because prices were too high and everyone was busy. We'll work to get that completed this year. I'll now turn it over to Stan.
All right, thanks. A couple slides for me. So very familiar with this screen. So we're roughly 20 million a day in March. Obviously, as the last bullet indicates, you know, Woodland's significantly more draw right now, but that's because they're putting into the ASR wells for summer use. And then all of our contractual agreements were met. Water quality reports are posted as usual. And we are, as Tim mentioned, diverting under our normal water right at this point with term 91 not in effect. Just a couple other indicators. So we are still using alum at the plant as our coagulant instead of ferric chloride. We have been running very well on that. One of the potential drawbacks to that, although probably not this summer, is DDW is requiring us to incrementally increase our flows and then show some testing results using alum to ensure that the plant continues to run smooth and delivers high quality water. So we are still a bit limited. And as indicated, we are considering using alum permanently or at a potential is being able to use either on a permanent basis, depending on availability of chemicals. We also were notified by the state orthophosphate could be limited based on the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. And that's also something we're monitoring moving forward. As I mentioned, I think last time, the raw water flow meter is being prepared to be pulled. We do need to diagnose and understand what's going on with it. We'll get that fixed. And then Jacobs at the plant is and has been simulating remote monitoring. Currently, the plant is staffed 24/7, but they are interested in piloting and understanding if they could remotely monitor at some hours of the evening, and if DDW would permit that. So they are simulating that and then potentially might request that moving forward. Obviously working with the management of the agency. And then there is going to be some vegetation management. So on the north side of the plant, we did have some areas of vegetation that we needed to clear. And so that work was done. And we probably will be looking to add some other vegetation that may prevent some of the issues we saw on that side of the plant. Essentially, there was some camping that was going on along that edge, and given the nature of the plant, we need to minimize and limit that type of activity. And that was it for the operations.
Thank you, Stan. Any questions for Stan from anyone? Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Any public comment on item number 5, Michelle?
No public comments on item 5.
Thank you. It's going to take us to item number 6, fiscal year 22-23 budget overview. Is that going to be Tim?
Yeah, that will be me. Okay, next slide, please. The first slide is really an overview of the budget through February of this year. It's really the first 8 months of the fiscal year. We have about 4 months to go. This is broken down over the total agency budget in each of the partners' budgets individually and where we are. I'm not going to read through all the numbers. But the short answer is that we are tracking well. We're a little bit less than 66% of expenditures through 66% of the year. So we're overall on track. There's no surprises of any kind for any of the partners. Next slide, please. Kind of a little bit more at a higher level where we're tracking in each of our budget categories. On the O&M category, we are tracking about $1 million under our budget. And I'll explain more in a little bit as to how these numbers are different and why. O&M oversight category and permits and water supply were slightly under, although I feel like we're going to be catching up a bit because we've been spending quite a bit of effort in permits and water supply category anyways. And agency administration, we're tracking a bit under budget as well, but I think we'll catch up a bit on that as well the rest of the year. Operation contingency, that is our contingency in case something were to happen that the agency needed to spend some money on. We have never used that contingency to date, and we are continuing to project that we will not use it again this year. So that will come in as zero as well. And then our debt and reserve payments, those are based on our amortization schedules that we have. That will end up exactly per budget. So overall, we're tracking right around 1.2 million under budget after you take out the contingency amount. Any questions on where we're tracking so far this year? Okay, next slide, please. So the reason where we're at, roughly $950,000 of our underspending in the O&M category is because of reduced water availability, and that's mainly because of the long duration term 91 curtailment we had last year, and the Shasta critical year cutting 25% of our water supply. We did purchase a rather small amount of water from the Nature Conservancy, but the net result was that we ended up using substantially less water last year due to the ongoing drought, which of course reduced the electricity and chemical use. Almost $200,000 of the budget that we did not spend was due to not constructing the joint intake erosion control project last year. So that will really roll over till the next fiscal year, and we'll try to get that done this year. We did overspend the supplemental water purchase budget by about $83,000. And that was because we did do water purchase agreement last summer to help meet some of our demands last year. That does not include the $4.2 million for the Southside water purchase because we are using reserves for that money. The next two categories, the O&M oversight and the agency administration, are a little bit under. We're just slightly under on all the budget category items. There's not any one large thing. It's just we're a little bit under on all of them. I guess we could say we're efficient in spending in those categories. Agency admin budget, same thing, a bit under efficient, but I think we will catch up a bit due to the amount of time we're spending on water supply this year. Contingency of $415,000. As I mentioned, we're expecting to not use that. Next slide, please. So moving ahead to the next year's draft budget. Again, it's the same categories we always carry forward. We have the O&M category, basically cost to operate and maintain the water treatment plant and the joint intake. It's O&M category itself, plus oversight, permitting, water supply, agency administration, and then of course the operations contingency, and then the usual SRF debt and reserve payments. Next slide, please. So overall, our budget for next year, this is probably the first real increase in budget since the agency has been in operations. I think for the past 6 years, we've either been rather flat to slightly declining in our annual budget. This year, I think, is the first time there's a real increase, and unfortunately, we're actually projecting producing less water than we have in past years. So it's kind of and I'll get into that in a slide as to why that's happening. So really, the almost all of the increase is in the O&M category, and then the rest of the budget categories, oversight, supply, agency administration, are all very flat. Contingency goes up a little bit, and that's because the O&M category is going up by $1 million. So the net result is our current fiscal budget is 19.37 million. The proposed budget for next year is about 20.5 million, with an increase of about $1.1 million over last year. Next slide, please. So the reason for this is almost half of the O&M increase, about 525,000, is due to electricity costs. We even wrote in very high increases. We were hit with a 15.7% increase in our PG&E electric rate. That started in March of this year. I don't remember offhand what the increase for next year is, but it's a lot. The other factor that's really impacting us for electricity is the joint intake facility. We have WAPA power for that facility, which is federal government agency using hydroelectric electricity. This year, due to basically all of the reservoirs in the Western United States being very low, the expectation is that WAPA will have to buy market rate electricity for a large percentage of their electrical supply to everyone, which will really impact our electric costs at the intake this year. It's very favorable when there's hydroelectric power, but this year it's going to be much closer to market cost than hydroelectric cost. So the combination of the two is about $500,000 increase. There is about $141,000 increase in the fixed portion of operating the water treatment plant. That's for our contract. And a lot of that's really just due to inflation area increases. About $90,000 increase for pass-through chemicals. A couple examples of that is the orthophosphate that we're using, I believe, has nearly tripled in the past 2 months due to the war in Ukraine. A lot of phosphorus comes from over there, and it's really messing up supply. So the price has gone up a lot. Same thing with alum. Ferric that we're not using right now came back on the market, but the price is 4 times what it was a year ago. So we're not planning to go back to that, but alum's going up as well. So it's just kind of some unusual things going on in terms of chemical prices this year. We're adding this year, I think it's the first time, an additional amount in the repair and replacement expenses. We have to do some repairs of some equipment this year. Essentially, we're operating a large industrial facility, and certain parts wear out and need to be replaced. So we're having to do that really for the first time this year, about $130,000 worth. And then we're adding a bit additional budget, $110,000 to cover supplemental water purchases. We're expecting that the drought is going to continue, and that we will be needing to do something for this fall for water supply. Unless it really starts raining in October, we're going to need something for September. All of the other categories, items in the Series 100 O&M are pretty close year over year. Next slide, please. The O&M oversight and the permits and water supply, those 2 budget categories are very close to this year's budget. Pretty minimal changes. Under the O&M oversight, it's reduced a bit because the third-party inspections were completed. We're not doing that this year. And everything else is plus or minus $7,000 out of what we had last year. Permits and water supply do go up a bit for water rights support. We're expecting to need to do more this year than we have in past years. And then, but there's also a corresponding reduction because we did complete the water risk, supply risk and alternatives evaluation. So it's kind of a wash, really. Next slide, please. Agency admin is basically pretty flat, although there is a very significant increase in insurance this year. Increased insurance by about $30,000 or $37,000 over last year. That's on top of a pretty big increase last year. It doesn't seem to be there's anything we can really do about that, although we will see what we can do. But that increase in insurance is really offset by reductions in other areas, so it's pretty flat. Contingency goes up by about $50,000 only because the O&M category has gone up by $1 million, and it's a 5% contingency. Next slide, please. Debt and reserve payments remain the same. That will continue until they're done. We were actually including a line item as well to track reserve repayment because we did use reserve money to purchase water this year. We're working out a strategy with the partners on how much should we replenish and what time frame should we replenish that. And that will be brought up to the board to consider soon. I think at the next board meeting, ideally, we'll have that ready. But basically, we would like to replace at least some of the reserve amount prior to needing the money again. It could be that we stay in drought and we need to do another large purchase next year, or it could be that we come out of it and we don't have anything for a few years, but we should be prepared for that. Next slide, please. The next steps that we have is to fine tune the O&M budget. Like I mentioned with chemicals, that's been very dynamic in the past 2 months. Not sure if that will settle out, but I think electricity is kind of set. There's a few things we need to work out yet. And then we will bring the final budget to the board for consideration at the June board meeting. With that, I can take any, and the next slide is the questions. With that, I can take any questions that anyone has.
Thank you, Tim. Anybody have questions for Tim?
I do.
Camille has her hand up. Camille?
I do. Thank you. I am curious, we are also WAPA users at UC Davis, and we are also worried about the hydro. Question on where things kind of landed with the investigation of a on-site solar for us. We were looking at maybe a possible PPA, and I'm curious where that might be at.
Yeah, we've brought it forward a little bit. We met with a couple of solar consultants, but we haven't gone forward and selected anybody. I think this year we need to really do that. It did get a bit sidetracked, I think, with water purchase investigations we've been doing quite a bit the last 4 months or so already. But that's something that needs to be a priority, I think, going forward, because it's yeah.
It helps us determine our fate, our destiny.
Yeah, and we did look into it a bit, and the agency has not a whole lot of property available that isn't already occupied by buildings or large mazes of conduits and pipes underground. So we did look into that at least. We do have some site limitations within our property ourselves. We don't have a whole lot of land that we could even put a pole in the ground to put a solar panel on top of, just because underground, everywhere where there's not buildings, there's pretty much pipes and conduits everywhere. So it's something we looked at is how much can we even do within our property? But yeah, that's something that we'll need to get going on more seriously this year.
I have a question. I think this was discussed before, but was Valley Clean Energy an option? Does that help at all?
I think we are part of Valley Clean Energy. Michelle, is that correct?
I'm gonna look right now at our recent PG&E bills, but I don't
I think we are part of them. It doesn't change a whole lot for us because we're such a large.
Yeah, the cost comparison is actually pretty similar between VC or otherwise. It's just if you choose as an entity to go to the ultra green rate, it is a bit more than PG&E. Although with the recent cost increases with PG&E coming up, there might be a reevaluation of that. But the way VC was structured previously was pretty similar to the current PG&E rate.
I'm on the Valley Clean Energy Board
Yeah.
at the current time, and we are tracking exactly with PG&E's rate.
Right.
But we have a higher percentage of
Renewable. Yeah.
renewables, yes.
So to answer your question, we are part of Valley Clean Energy.
Right.
And just looking at the current bill that we just received, the prices are quite different, but I don't know if that's because they're supplemental or how that works, but
Could
we
be
are,
a different rate structure, yeah.
Yeah.
But it is, and as a
whole.
as Member Stoller indicated, that it does track with PG&E's current rate. Although the board could choose or ask for a discussion item at a future board meeting of indicating maybe to go to the ultra green rate, which was, I think, about only, I think, a cent and a half higher per kilowatt hour. But we could evaluate that if the board had interest on a future board meeting.
Yeah, and we will, and we are going to be having WAPA power at the water treatment plant beginning in 2025.
Yeah.
I think if I remember correctly, it's about 25% or so of the electricity that we use there. It's not full supply, but that will help, at least when there's enough hydropower going around.
Mhm.
Quick follow-up question. So I would actually be very interested if other board members were interested in that analysis and a presentation. Are there other options for us? Looking at, kind of our, I guess we are in PG&E territory, so it's VCE or PG&E, right? Or
Yeah.
WAPA.
And WAPA, and we are approved. We did try to get full supply from WAPA.
Mm-hmm.
Back when we applied for that, back in 2020, I think, or maybe even 2019. And they came back and gave us the allocation they gave us. So I don't think we'll have, we could ask, but I don't know that we'll have an opportunity to change that amount. It ends up being about 25% of what we use at the water plant. And then solar, I think, are our main options.
And then do we have any options in terms of demand management and time of use? Are we subject to time of use rates? Is there any operational shifts we could make that work still for what we need to do, but also might get us into lower rate structures?
That's, go ahead. Well, I mean, Tim, go ahead.
I don't know that we have much ability to do time of use. We should make sure we're in the most optimum rate structure, but the agency more or less produces water at a pretty constant rate throughout the day. We do maintain about 6 million gallons of operational storage, but that's mainly because each city, each partner can adjust their flow rate whenever they want to, and the agency has to provide that water. And it takes about 3 hours for the plant to ramp up or down. So we need 6 million to kind of make everything balance out. But because of that balancing, we end up at a pretty constant rate throughout the day. It does change throughout the year, but day by day, there's not much change. Or throughout the day, not much.
So we don't really have time of use options available to us.
Yeah, not really.
Bummer.
And in line with what Camille's asking, Valley Clean Energy's part of our purpose is to encourage the development of more renewables in our service territory. And so we actually have a solar farm down in Winters, for example, has been developed by a farmer down there. And we are contracting with some solar farms elsewhere in the state. But there's so many things happening in energy these days that I think we just have to keep our antenna up and see what works. We might even find a private sector partner who wants to work with us. So there are other options, and all those would be consistent with what Valley Clean Energy is trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to share Camille's request that we do look into it, because it seems to keep going up. Every time you look at the media, PG&E has their hand out. So I think it's worth looking at, for the immediate future as well as long term.
Yes. Okay.
I would like to point out too, a lot of people don't understand that there's a transmission charge on the bill from PG&E for moving the energy, and it's always higher than the actual energy itself, which is what Valley Clean Energy is supplying. So, and PG&E's total filed rate increases, I think, is almost 44%, which is a ton.
Well, and that is a key point, is you cannot get away under the present scenarios, you can't remove yourself from PG&E altogether.
And Valley Clean Energy will never be, for even if we acquired their assets and became the local transmission piece as well, because PG&E controls the wholesale lines that are moving across the state. Right. So, but even SMUD pays PG&E for that.
Yeah, same thing with WAPA. WAPA uses PG&E's lines.
Did you say WAPA is about 25% less than PG&E?
Oh no, it's more than 50% less than PG&E.
Is it worth asking again?
The WAPA is very interesting. Their base rate is incredibly inexpensive, and then they add back in charges. So basically, they're a no-profit electrical supplier. So it's really hard to pin down the exact rate, because they have the base rate, and then there's all these retroactive charges from like the previous month and previous quarter. They're always having to go back and true up, but overall, it's I think probably around half to less than half PG&E's rate.
Yeah, and to answer the question, they only have certain timeframes where you can apply for additional allocations. Okay. So I think the answer is yes. Is anytime there's an open ability, it probably would behoove us to apply and see if we can gain allocation.
Okay, well, if you both need knee pads, I'll get you some knee pads.
Sure. Yeah, we applied for the back end, either 2019 or 2020 to start in 2025. And we had applied for two things: full supply at the water treatment plant, and then our own meter at the intake. And they approved no changes at the intake, because we already have a joint meter there. and then about 25% of what we requested for the water treatment plant itself.
All right.
So they kind of base their, you know, what users do they have, how many people have requested supply, and try to do a best fit with everyone. So we can go back and request, but I don't know. Partly just because it was such a long process to even get in.
Yeah.
And then we ultimately signed a 30-year contract through 2055 or 2054, I think is what we did. So they take a very long view of things.
Okay. Anything else on number 6? Do you have any public comment, Michelle, on budget?
No public comment on budget.
Thank you. That's going to take us to item number 7, the long range board calendar. And our next quarterly meeting is going to be what?
June
16th.
16th.
And we're going to be scheduled in Davis. So the next question is, Davis, where are you at regarding open public sessions?
We are planning, well, Will, you want to answer?
We're back, baby. Ted.
Yeah, so as of May, Davis is planning on being back in person, so.
All right. And so
Okay.
that begs the question, should we meet in person then on June 16th? Probably should.
I would
Let's do
say
it with
that-
cupcakes.
Yes, that's where the negotiations start.
The snacks, which snacks?
Snacks are available. So I will,
Well, I told,
go ahead, sir.
well, I told our council members that you enjoy a smorgasbord behind your council chambers there.
Yeah.
We don't get such luxuries.
Sure.
I will look to see about booking those dates, actually both that one and the third quarter.
All right.
I'll look to book the chambers, and if there's any conflict, we'll let the board know.
Okay, so as it stands,
you.
we'll plan on meeting in person on June 16th at 3 p.m. in the city of Davis, unless we hear otherwise. Sound like a plan?
Yay.
All right. Anything else on the long range calendar, anybody? Doesn't sound like it. That takes us to number 8. Let me back up. Any public comment on the calendar, Michelle?
No, none.
Thank you. Takes us to number 8, member comments. We have a member of our board have any comment to make? Doesn't sound like it. That's going to take us to item number 9. We're going to adjourn the regular session, and we're going to go right into the special meeting. Is that right, Tim?
Yes.
Right.
Okay, so hang on a minute, I have to switch. Well, one, we can stop recording, Michelle.
Yep.
And then I'll look to switch the. No recording.
No recording.
Oh, that's right.
Closed session.
Probably start over again.
Yeah, we're at item 5 of the special meeting notice. Let the record reflect the board did not take any action in closed session.
Right, thank you. That takes us to item number 6 on this special meeting. Consider approving term sheet authorizing our general manager to execute a purchase agreement for water, Conaway Preservation Group, for the purchase of supplemental water.
Yeah, I can talk about that real briefly. So the agency staff have been working with Conaway Preservation Group and other water agencies to look for some supplemental water for September and October. We've arrived at a term sheet with Conaway. It is non-binding, but it is an agreement for up to 1,300 acre feet of water at a cost of $375 an acre foot plus expenses, which brings the total to around $544 per acre foot. This would be water that the agency would use really only in September and October, with some of it in earlier months as needed. I think with that, I can take any questions.
Thank you, Tim. Any questions for Mr. Bush on the item number 6? Doesn't sound like it. Michelle, any public comments?
No public comments on item 6.
Thank you. A motion?
Arnold moves.
Arnold moves item number 6, which is the
Allard seconds.
Stallard seconds. Madam Clerk.
Director Will Arnold,
Aye, 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 aye.
Director Tom Stallard,
Aye.
Vice Chair Josh Chapman,
Aye.
Chair Rich Landsberg.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. That takes us to item number 7, adjournment from this special meeting. We'll see you all at our regular board meeting scheduled for June 16, 2022 at 3 p.m. probably and maybe at the Davis City Hall Council Chambers on Russell Boulevard in Davis. Expect the full room of snacks there, Will and Josh.
Yeah, I'll let the farmer's market folks know.
Excellent. Thank you. Have a good evening, everyone.